If you walked through a market in ancient Greece or along a busy street in early Rome, you would have seen a fruit that looked almost unreal, small, bright, deep red, like polished stone catching the light. It wasn't soft like modern fruit. It wasn't overly sweet. It didn't need to be. Because this wasn't just food, this was survival. Long before modern agriculture, before grocery stores, before supply chains, people relied on what was dependable, what could grow without constant care, what could be stored, preserved, and used when times were uncertain, and this fruit was everywhere. It grew wild across entire regions. It produced reliably, and it offered something incredibly valuable in a world where food security was never guaranteed. It was tart, yes, but that tartness meant something. It meant preservation. It meant longevity. It meant this fruit could be turned into something that lasted. And people understood that. This wasn't a luxury. It wasn't reserved for the wealthy or the elite. It was used by everyone. Travelers carried it. Families stored it. Communities depended on it. In fact, references to this fruit appear in some of the oldest recorded stories in human history. In the Odyssey, it's described as part of the natural landscape. Something familiar, something expected, not rare, not special, just essential. And that's what makes its story so strange. Because something this common, something this useful, something this important shouldn't have disappeared. But it did, or at least it almost did. This tree didn't just feed people, it helped build civilizations. Its wood was unlike most others, dense, durable, almost impossibly strong. So strong, in fact, that it was used to make weapons. Not simple tools, weapons of war. In ancient times, when survival often depended on strength and endurance, materials mattered. A weak spear meant failure. A broken weapon meant death. This tree didn't break. It held. It absorbed impact. It endured stress. It performed when it mattered most. And because of that, it became trusted. Armies relied on it. Weapons were crafted from it. And over time, it became tied to something larger than just utility. It became symbolic. In ancient Rome, there's a story about the founding of the city itself. A spear was thrown to mark its boundary. Not just any spear, one made from this tree. And when it struck the ground, it didn't just land. It took root, and it grew. The tree became sacred. People believed its health reflected the strength of the city itself. If the tree thrived, Rome thrived. If it weakened, it was a warning. And this wasn't just mythology. It shows how deeply connected this plant was to daily life, to identity, to survival. Even figures like Alexander the Great are tied to its legacy. His armies used weapons crafted from this wood, tools that needed to endure long campaigns, repeated impact, and constant use. This tree delivered something few others could, strength without compromise, and yet, that wasn't even its most important role. Over time, its role began to change, from battlefields to homes, from weapons to medicine. By the Middle Ages, this fruit had become something different. Healers used it regularly. It was part of daily remedies, something trusted, something familiar. It helped with digestion. It supported recovery. It was turned into syrups, preserves, and tonics. By the 1800s, it wasn't unusual to find it in households as a treatment for common illnesses. It wasn't exotic, it wasn't rare, it was normal. And then, slowly, that started to change. Not because the plant failed, but because people did something we've done many times before. We changed what we valued. For most of human history, food wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about sweetness. It wasn't about instant satisfaction. It was about function. Could it store? Could it last? Could it sustain you when things got difficult? That's what mattered. But as sugar became more available, everything shifted. Taste became the priority. People wanted sweetness, immediate flavor, something easy, something you could pick and eat without waiting. This fruit didn't fit that model because it requires patience. If you eat it too early, it's sharp, astringent, almost unpleasant. But if you wait, if you let it fully ripen, it changes, it softens, it becomes something entirely different. But that takes time, and time became something people weren't willing to give. At the same time, agriculture itself was changing, not in small ways, in massive ones. Food production shifted toward efficiency, uniformity, scalability, and this is where this tree was left behind. Not because it lacked nutrition, not because it lacked resilience, but because it didn't fit the system. There was one major problem: the pit. Unlike modern cherries, where machines can easily separate flesh from seed, this fruit holds tightly to its core. The pit doesn't release cleanly, and that makes processing difficult, too difficult for large-scale production. And in a system built on speed and efficiency, that's enough to eliminate something entirely. So instead of adapting to it, it was replaced by fruits that were easier to process, sweeter, more uniform, more profitable. And over time, those replacements became the standard, while this tree faded into the background, but it never disappeared. It still grows, quietly, in overlooked places, in small orchards, in the hands of people who still understand its value. Because this isn't just a fruit tree, it's a long-term investment, a tree that can produce for decades, sometimes centuries. It doesn't demand constant replacement. It doesn't rely on fragile systems. It simply continues, and that's the difference. This wasn't lost because it failed. It was lost because it didn't fit. And now, it's still here, waiting to be remembered.